For quite a while, Snowgrave seemed to drive all discussion of Deltarune. Even after all we've seen in Undertale, it was quite a curveball, especially after the absence of any such path in Chapter 1, and I think I speak for most of us when I say I'm very interested in seeing where it ends up. But why is that? Why does this matter? Why am I so interested in being able to kill monsters in these games? Well, let's look at the precedent that Toby Fox set with Undertale for why this opens up a lot of interesting possibilities. The genocide run of Undertale, as it's come to be known among fans, shows how Toby Fox plays to the strengths of video games to tell a story in a way that would probably not work very well in other media. You're able to explore an alternate scenario in the same setting, which is nice to see in a character-focused storyline like Undertale. I tend to look at it as kind of a character study. You can see these characters pitted against a relentless force of violence incarnate. And this gives a lot more depth to them. When they're up against pure evil, you get to see their best sides. Undyne resolves to fight you not for the sake of her duty, but to protect the entire world. Alphys would normally commit suicide following the deaths of certain characters, who are likewise doomed in the genocide run. But when she sees what kind of threat you present in this route, she snaps into action and does what she can to save as many monsters as possible from the indiscriminate slaughter. It seems that the call to action is what helps her conquer her inner demons. Sans likewise needed some motivation to step up. Boy, do you provide it in a genocide run. In any other path, he's submitted to despair, and commits no effort to anything as a result. He will just allow any outcome just short of the one that ruins the universe forever. If you recall, the soulless pacifist ending, as it's often called. In the final moment, though, when the stakes are highest, he sets aside his apathy and resolves to give everything he has to stop you. When you learn these sides of the characters, you get a more well-rounded idea of who they really are. To me, the most profound character moment is when Papyrus confronts you and offers forgiveness, not because he's scared of you or what you'll do, which he is, but that's not his main reason. It's mostly because he's genuinely worried seeing someone go down this dark path. And that's fantastic, and you'd never even know he had it in him if you didn't see a genocide run. If you do take him up on his offer and spare him, or allow him to spare you from his perspective, he's just incredibly happy that you've chosen redemption and doesn't even fight you at all. This moment really stuck with me. It's like the prodigal son, except you can only see Papyrus's differing reactions to each son, if you will, in these two different playthroughs. There's more to it than just a character study aspect as well. You don't know the value of something until it's gone, and all the thought and care put into things like how Sans reacts to Papyrus dying, even in a neutral ending, or how the narrations in Toriel's home change after her death. Ironically enough, these countless little details in response to characters dying add so much life to the game, and they serve to put things into perspective to help the player appreciate what these characters mean to the setting they're a part of. I can understand why someone might not want to do these things themselves, but for me, this kind of thing enriches the setting a lot. It also lets you explore the meta angle in detail because your decisions as a player are the root cause of any differences from the normal path. And so the game looks at your role in the story and takes it to task when assessing the consequences. The genocide or Snowgrave games reflect on the kinds of things you see in all sorts of fantasy RPGs which typically aren't given a second thought. The genocide run brings perspective to the notion of staying in one place and killing monsters until you gain enough power to move on. The dragons you slay in Final Fantasy wouldn't sensibly be a renewable resource, for instance. What if that actually had repercussions? And a lot of the time these aren't mindless beasts, but human beings or some other kind of sentient creature that you're slaughtering, which does make it a bit more questionable to go out of your way to kill them for no higher cause except to make a number go up. Hell, if you think of how dangerous it would be for people to level up, it would be pretty alarming when even a little kid can end up becoming an unstoppable force just by running around and punching frogs all day. Imagine that. It's nice to see a game call attention to that sort of thing. Is it worth taking all this seriously? Maybe not, in the context of those games, but Toby Fox seems to have thought it was worth a second thought after all. People tend to overemphasize how disturbing and dark these alternate paths are. The Snowgrave final battle against Spamton honestly had me dying. It was one of the funniest things I've seen in a game. For Undertale, there's the deliberate bathos that comes with something like the dark Temmie village theme, or seeing Burger Pants as the last man standing. And let's not forget about Metaton's utterly pathetic fight as Neo. Despite the general fan reaction, the Genocide run is still full of humor. Now, humor is a deeply subjective thing, but from my perspective, Toby Fox has a real strength in that sort of dark humor, and the jokes that come out of these runs are exquisite. They never would have been possible without the context. In both of the darker routes, the games maintain some balance of silliness against the heavier and heartfelt tone, and it really does add to the overall charm of the game when the dust has settled. It may seem like otherwise on the surface, but it's not just a one-dimensional, angsty murder fest. There's also the theme of choices in games. Flowey is a mirror of the player who's done everything he could just to see what would happen after he was content with seeing the positive interactions. And that's what a lot of our choices when playing a game come down to. You did your Paragon run, now you gotta do a Renegade run, just to see what would happen, what lies beneath the surface that you've seen. Not because you think it would lead to a better outcome, in fact, probably the opposite. It's just how you see more of what the game has to offer. Anyone who's played Mass Effect, for instance, has probably wondered how different things are if you take every possible misstep along the way. Get everyone you can killed and see if Commander Shepard is able to fumble his or her way through the remainder of the series. You've already seen the Golden Boy ending, so why not something different? Undertale does a little bit of introspection on that kind of motivation to play the game. Sort of a morbid curiosity drives us, perhaps. The soulless pacifist ending, as people call it, is such a low blow against the player, and I love it. If you assume the player is part of the story, the fact that you have the intent and the motive to do a genocide run and have demonstrated a willingness to do it means that you would be absolutely evil from the perspective of this world. That doesn't go away just because you undo it. If you had the chance to play God and you used it to torture everyone in the world only to turn back the clock and make everyone happy again, would you really be a benevolent force? Do you deserve a pat on the back after that? Undertale was a great experiment in exploring that concept. But to many players, the game comes off as overly preachy, especially with regards to how the player is called out directly. Look at Flowey, he's bad and he's just doing the same thing as you. To some, it makes the story come off as judgmental towards the player as a person, and I can see how it comes off that way, but I don't think that was the intent, and I don't feel the same way about it. Here's how I see it. If the game feels like it's judging you, bear in mind, the characters condemning your actions is not the same thing as Toby Fox hopping on Twitter and casting moral judgment on his audience based on how they play his game. What happens in the game isn't the author making an attack on the player as a person, but characters reacting to the player as an actor in the story. It's simply the game taking itself seriously and acknowledging its own stakes, and these criticisms from those characters, they're kind of fair. One of the major themes Toby Fox has in his works is exploring the relationship between player and player characters, so with that element already in play, it would be weirder if the game didn't react harshly to you deciding to kill everyone for no reason. A lot of people like to joke that the greatest challenge of the genocide run isn't killing Sans, but killing Papyrus. Papyrus presents no threat to you and pretty much begs you to stop for your own sake, like I mentioned earlier. And when you account for things like that, you can't say that you didn't have every incentive to drop the genocide run. You have to not only persevere in the face of the game's hardest fight, but also continue to kill when it can't possibly be seen as necessary. Again, from the moral framework of the game, you'd have to be a real bastard to do this, and so the game judges your actions accordingly, within its own confines. And so I don't think there's anything actually wrong with the person, the player, who performs a genocide run, and there is nothing you can do in Undertale for any reason that makes you a bad person. It's a game. I get it. I hope I don't give the impression that I think otherwise. For those that do, wait until you hear about Grand Theft Auto. But that aside, I do think it's an interesting philosophical standpoint for a game to take. There are interesting things to say about it if you don't take it too seriously, and if you look at it for the sake of argument, just as something to think about, not to take literally. So that's my excuse for the game. As for Flowey calling out stream viewers, I think that's mostly so people who are too scared to go through with it themselves don't think they're better than anyone for having the exact same motive as anyone who actually does it. They aren't off the hook, so they still come away with something to think about. So what comparisons can we draw between Snowgrave and Genocide besides the obvious? What sticks out to me the most is that Toby Fox has done a good job making things fresh even if they are familiar. For instance, Snowgrave is definitely less broad of a character study than Genocide. There hasn't been much of any reaction to the Snowgrave path on part of, say, Ralsei or Susie, although I'm hoping there will be a payoff where they find out what we've been doing in the dark. Spamton gets a bit more characterization and shows that he was a much bigger threat than he may have seemed otherwise, and we do get to see Bertley proving that he is actually willing to risk his own life to protect his friend, but most of the character exploration we see is centered on one character, Noelle. And her role in Snowgrave is probably why this route often has a bigger impression on people than Genocide did. If you weigh the death tolls and the damage you do, Snowgrave doesn't even come close to Genocide so far, but all your dirty work is done through Noelle by proxy. Well, a secondary proxy if you see Chris as not being responsible for what the player decides to do, and there's something more disturbing about corrupting the innocent, sweet girl into murdering people and doing it yourself. She doesn't even know what's real, and you take advantage of her and awaken something dark within her. It comes off kinda like an abusive relationship. The fact that this is Chris's classmate being driven to kill another classmate of theirs also means that it hits closer to home than a bunch of random monsters getting dustified. Undertale, on the other hand, also wastes a lot of players' time at the end of the day, even if it's in the service of artistic achievement. Toby Fox is trying to make a point when he forces you to kill everything by grinding to advance the Genocide playthrough, but Deltarune doesn't really do that. Pretty much every moment is advancing the story, and your jackass stunts in Cybertown go by very fast and are dense with these new character developments. The most important part is that everything you do revolves around a character who actually reacts to what is going on. And again, that makes the whole thing a lot more personal than one kid going on a genocidal rampage without anyone else being there to voice an opinion on what's happening for most of it. There's some great revelations towards the end of a Genocide run, but getting there, Frisk alone doesn't really have much interesting going on. So I definitely say we've seen an improvement in terms of presentation, and I have to wonder how crucial Noelle in particular is to the continuation of this route. Deltarune also maintains the meta angle. There's this theme of getting stronger that we're seeing undercurrents of. Noelle turns out to be an RPG fan, and under your guidance does the most obvious thing, killing enemies and getting XP. And you know, a lot of these RPGs do feature a little kid killing a bunch of monsters under the guidance of people who should know better. Usually there's a good reason and all, say, saving the world. But making a child fight is something that should probably weigh heavier upon the party than it usually does in these games. Another connection I noted is Noelle reacting with relief at being unequipped with the Thorn Ring, which is stated to cause damage and pain to the wearer, and that invokes other games. Consider that it's a little weird that you can force items to be equipped on your buddies regardless of how that character might feel about the item in question, especially when it's, say, an item that causes them to go down to half HP as the price of doing extra damage. Wouldn't some of them protest? Wouldn't that, hurt? What's really going on there? Anyway, it's hard to tell where the theme of getting stronger will end up, but I would be interested in seeing perhaps a good side to the pursuit of strength. What that could entail, it could be a lot. I've heard a lot of people speculate that the only way to save Rudy will be for Noelle to get supercharged from Snowgrave, which could probably be written in a good way, I guess, but it does sound pretty ridiculous to me right now, and I don't think it would be the right call, but I wouldn't mind being proven wrong. It's also interesting to note that Snowgrave starts and stops, whereas Genocide changed pretty much every facet of the game and was fairly consistent once it got started. But now, instead of a force of absolute unrelenting evil, it's like seeing a serial killer living out his normal life in between killings or something. What's really neat about Snowgrave is how it caught me off guard. After Chapter 1, I didn't think we were going to see anything resembling the Genocide route. I thought the story just wasn't going to go there. And then we got Snowgrave, and man, I can't wait to see more, and expectations have been raised. Chapter 1 really did feel like it was missing something, so it's good to see the concept revisited with a new spin. I hope that the future chapters will reap the full potential of what we've seen so far with this wonderful alternate route. It's fun for all of us to soak in the story at the same pace and all that, but it really does kind of suck having the resolutions to these questions be potentially years away. My biggest concern is how the consequences will be handled in the long run. I did mention that Snowgrave doesn't really go far with the character explorations of most characters besides Noelle, and I'm worried this might be by design in an effort to avoid irreversible character development that might introduce a few too many possibilities to account for. Most characters are either oblivious to Chris's role in the chaos or unaware of anything weird happening at all, and Noelle might just be able to repress the whole thing. Maybe the game is being planned out in a way that future chapters are able to just write their way around acknowledging what we've seen of the Snowgrave route altogether, and it won't make a difference going forward. But I guess it would bring us full circle with our choices not mattering in this theme of determinism. It would take a lot to convince me that this would be worth ditching the parallel storyline that's been set up, though. It's a good thing to have after all, so obviously I think it's wasted potential if it just gets thrown away. It's worth noting that, Birdley is kind of dead and all, and that's not something that can be entirely ignored, at least not in the light world. So, Snowgrave will surely have a lasting impact, it's just a question of how much. There's just so much soul in the Genocide run, so much effort was put into it. It wasn't half-assed, and it could have been in the game, still would have been fine. But there's all these songs, all these story sequences, many important aspects of the story besides just the character traits and the meta stuff are only revealed to you in the Genocide run. Without a doubt, it deeply enriches the story of Undertale, even if it's not an option most of us would prefer to be canon, for whatever value that word might have in this situation. It was a bold way to tell the story, and while whatever Snowgrave is going to be may not seem like quite as unique a prospect at this point, so far Snowgrave has proven to be very captivating, and it's only just started, so I have faith in our man. I believe in Toby Fox. I think he'll deliver, and we'll come away from this with something even more interesting to discuss than Undertale's Genocide route.